from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu.
The lawsuit has been filed. Welcome to the Thursday edition as Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook makes good on her promise to sue President Trump over his attempt to fire her for alleged mortgage fraud, ever escalating the standoff between the White House and the Fed. We've got this story covered for you this hour. White House is responding, and we'll have a live report coming up from the White House with insights from Bloomberg's Michael McKee and a special conversation with Donald Ayer, former Deputy Attorney General in President George H.W. Bush's administration and former Principal Deputy Solicitor General. He knows what it's like to argue a case before the Supreme Court, and he'll have insights for us shortly. Our political panel in place as well. Bloomberg politics contributor Jeanne Zaino is with us alongside Republican strategist Lisa Camooso Miller. So let's start, as ever, on Wall Street. Charlie Pellet has a look at stocks this day after Nvidia earnings. Charlie, how are we doing?
Right now, higher across the board for now, Joe Mathieu. Lots of moving parts to this market. The Fed story and Lisa Cook. We've got economic data this morning, economic data tomorrow, and of course, as you pointed out, we got Nvidia. We begin there with Nvidia trading lower after earnings, down now by 1.2%. Our Mag 7 index, though, it is advancing by 0.2%. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, they're all in the green. S&P right now keeping it all in context, up 8, up by 0.1%. The Dow just dipping lower as I speak, down 10 now, drop there of under 0.1%. NASDAQ Composite Index up 78 for NASDAQ. That is a gain of 0.4%. The Mag 7 Index, as we mentioned, up 0.2%. Dow Transport, so they are lower, down 0.4%. 10-year, 4.21%. The 2-year, 3.62%. Spot gold now up $18 the ounce, $34.15, up 0.5%. West Texas Intermediate crude, $63.58 a barrel, down 0.9%. And Bitcoin, just about flat on the day, $112,400 on Bitcoin. We'll call it unchanged on the day. You mentioned Nvidia as we kick things off. It is the world's most valuable company, out with a tepid revenue forecast for the current period. Nvidia shares lower now by 1.1%. Again, recapping here, the Dow just turning lower, little change, down 9. S&P holding on to a gain of 0.1%. Indeed, could see another record close on the S&P. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcast. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, Joe Mathieu.
We thank you, Charlie Pellet, and we'll get back to Charlie in just about 20 minutes for the latest on the Thursday trade. Welcome to Little Friday, and thank you for being with us here on Bloomberg TV and radio, as well satellite radio channel 121. You can always find us on YouTube. Search Bloomberg Business News Live with the headline on the terminal that says it all. Lisa Cook sues Trump over move to oust her from Fed board. We saw it coming. Her lawyer, Abby Lowell, told us 2 days ago that this lawsuit would be on the way, and now it is reality. Suing the president over his attempt to fire her for alleged mortgage fraud, challenging his claim that she may have lied on the mortgage application. And of course, in a fraud case, you have to prove that it was intentional. Realizing we're talking about documents here, mortgage applications. In this case, according to what we understand from the White House, she wrote that in both cases she would be a full-time resident. Part of this case, the defense will zero in on the idea that this may have simply been a clerical error. And this is where we start with Tyler Kendall, Bloomberg Washington correspondent, has the latest on all of this, including the reaction from the White House. She's on the North Lawn. Tyler, what do we know?
Yeah, hey, Joe. Well, we really have gotten no signs from this White House that they are going to let up on their pressure campaign against the central bank and now Fed Governor Lisa Cook. We should say that we had breaking news in the last hour that a 10 a.m. hearing has been set for tomorrow inside a federal courthouse here in Washington, where a judge is going to hear Cook's request for what's known as a temporary restraining order. This is going to decide whether or not she's able to retain her seat, perhaps even have a vote in that September FOMC meeting while the broader case about the firing plays out in court. Of course, that issue here has to do with what we have been talking about, this issue of cause. The White House today, in a statement through the White House press secretary, says that the White House has found sufficient cause to fire Cook and that this is well within President Trump's right, his domain, to do so. However, the idea of cause, it's not explicitly defined. This is outlined in Section 10 of the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 that says he has to prove this cause. But historically, it's been meant to mean malfeasance, neglect of ignoring duties while on the job. But at this point, these are just allegations. No formal charges have been brought. I was pretty struck during your conversation with White House trade advisor Peter Navarro yesterday, who gave us a little bit of insight into how the White House might be playing this down the road, saying that it doesn't matter that these allegations have to do with her private conduct, nothing to do with her job at the Federal Reserve. Now, in that filing, we did hear from Cook's attorney, and we got perhaps an outline of some of the arguments to come. She didn't explicitly deny the allegations, but did give us a little bit of a preview that perhaps when it comes to the issue with these applications, that they were mislabeled unintentionally. And that is really one of the key things here that the court is going to have to decide, Joe.
Well, that's really important stuff. And we do have an emergency hearing, as Tyler mentioned, set for tomorrow morning. So, Tyler, we're going to do this all over again tomorrow, it looks like. And we do appreciate the very latest from the White House. Bloomberg's Michael McKee has also been all over this, and he joins us from World Headquarters in New York. Of course, the man who brings you coverage of the Federal Reserve and is in the room with Jay Powell for the news conferences. Michael, you've been learning a bit more about Lisa Cook. She's been working from home. Do we have any idea about how this will play out tomorrow in this emergency hearing?
We don't, although she does not have to attend the hearing. Her lawyers will be there for her. It's not a hearing before a jury or anything like that. It's arguments made by the lawyers, which will be backed up in writing by their pleadings for the judge to make a decision. However, we have been reading the request. I have been reading the request for this temporary restraining order that would keep her in place until all this moves through the court. And we get the closest thing we have had to a defense from her on the mortgage allegations. The lawyers say, consequently, neither the type of offense the president cited nor the threadbare evidence against Governor Cook would constitute cause for removal, even if the president's allegations were true, which they are not. So it does appear that Cook is pleading innocent in a way to this, that she did not do anything wrong. And as Tyler was saying, there are some hints as to what might have happened, but that probably is a story for another day. We'll get more information on that as it develops.
Okay. What are the odds that she's actually going to take part in next month's meeting, Mike?
It's a little hard to say at this point. If this follows the pattern that we saw in the Wilcox case, Gwen Wilcox from the National Labor Relations Board, they will go to the district court, and given the pleadings that they've had so far that I have seen, it does appear that she will probably get that temporary restraining order from the district court, which means that immediately the Trump administration goes to the U.S. Court of Appeals to try to get that overturned. And in Wilcox's case, it was overturned. But how fast all that happens isn't clear. We're going to get the TRO hearing tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern time. We could see a decision by the judge within the day. Then you have the weekend, and at that point, we wait for the appeals to hit the appeals court, and then the appeals court will have to schedule a hearing. So the closer we get to September 17th, the more likelihood she might actually get to stay there if tomorrow the judge decides she can remain.
White House feels like it already has not only the grounds, but the due process under its belt. That's what Peter Navarro told me last night when we talked about this. Michael, what do you make of the approach that the documents themselves are due process?
That is not going to pass in any court of law. Due process means you get to face your accuser and answer the charges and get a chance to show you're innocent. And in this case, that was never provided as the lawsuit charges. She was never even told that she was going to be fired. She learned about it from the president's Trump social feed. So in this case, there was never any attempt to find out what the circumstances around this were.
Fascinating, as always. Michael McKee, thank you so much. Live from World Headquarters in New York. Michael has been instrumental in our coverage here of this case since it was first threatened. And we'll go back to what Peter Navarro said in our conversation last evening when I asked him about due process in this case. Here's what he said.
On the face of it, that's malfeasance. Now, the statute doesn't say the malfeasance has to happen while you're in office in the Fed. It just says malfeasance. This is due process. The president has the power to do exactly what she's doing. Fire her for cause, in this case, malfeasance.
This is where we start our conversation with Donald Ayer. I told you he would be with us, and he joins in studio the former Deputy Attorney General in the President George H.W. Bush administration, also former Principal Deputy Solicitor General. This man knows what it's like to argue a case before the Supreme Court. And we want to take a 30,000-foot view on everything that's been going on here the last couple of days in Washington. Donald Ayer, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and Radio. It's great to see you.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Just to start broadly with what we just heard, and I know you were listening as I was talking to Michael McKee and what we just heard from Peter Navarro, how should we define due process in this case?
Well, I think due process, as was just said, is a real process that involves an opportunity to have a hearing. And the situation here is like so many other things that we're seeing now, where actions are being taken that are going forward, and the impression that one gets because they're allowed to go forward is that there's a power there to do it. And the reality is that in many cases there's not. What's gone on is courts have looked at a great many things that the president has done, and the lower courts have, in many, many cases, essentially said this is unacceptable, it should be stayed. And then the Supreme Court, without actually deciding the propriety of the ultimate action, has essentially given discretion and given leeway to the administration. So I think, the Cook issue is one of many, but I think we have a tendency to want to look at the specifics and spend a lot of time talking about the specifics. What's far more important than any one of these situations is the pattern that's clearly emerged since the inauguration, which is a pattern of Donald Trump, in one instance after another, working to essentially overthrow the norms, procedures, checks of our process. And that's the real concern that we should all have. I understand the need to cover the news as it happens every day.
Yes,
and
of course.
the stuff that's thrown against the wall has got to be reported. But focusing only on that and not on the bigger picture is missing the fundamental point.
Well, let's stay big picture, because before you joined us, we were also talking about the head of the CDC being fired. We had the head of the BLS. I could go down the rap sheet for you here. Is this composite that you're referring to unconstitutional?
Well, yeah, it's not only unconstitutional, it's a systematic assault on all the things that we fundamentally have relied on, much of it based on the Constitution. And you can go through just a collection of general things that I think most listeners would probably acknowledge. One is, just on a fundamental level, we're dealing with the president who is not, he doesn't live in a fact-driven world. He basically makes up his own facts. If he doesn't like the facts, he fires somebody like the Bureau of Labor Statistics head, but he makes up his own facts, so he's not fact-driven. The second thing is that there's been a tremendous set of threats against people to neutralize the checks and balances. They're the threats against Republican congresspeople to be primaried. Now, that's not unconstitutional, but it's an effort to eliminate the working of our system.
And it's put a new burden on the courts.
Well, that's
because
right.
Congress has checked out of this.
It gets driven to the courts. The whole idea of undermining checks and balances, of essentially figuring out ways, part of our checks and balances involves the Fed. The Fed is a very important part for the business world and for our economy. And Trump is now working very hard to overcome the independence of the Fed. But he's also doing a lot of other things. If you look at the Department of Justice, the Department of Justice has been, for the last 50 years, since Watergate really, highly respected as an independent, fair, even-handed. People in this country have not worried for most of the last 50 years about having the Justice Department come after them for no good reason. Well, they do now worry about that, and there's reason to worry about that. And so this, again, is the president trying to neutralize people who will stand in his way. That's the bigger concern. And the problem with getting obsessed with I don't want to call them little, because they're not little things that are happening, but they're individual things. And if you view them in isolation, you miss the much bigger picture.
Yeah, so we'll stay with the forest here for a moment. Our listeners and viewers should know Donald Ayer argued 19 times before the U.S. Supreme Court. So you've been doing this for a minute. Have you ever seen a stress test like this?
No, I mean, absolutely not. I mean, I think that's the thing that I think is easy to lose perspective about is that what we've never had in this country, we had a civil war. We had a breakdown of the national sort of social fabric as a result of conflict in terms of interests between parts of the country. So we've been through a lot, but I think we've never had what the founders were, even after all the great work they did on the Constitution, still concerned about. And that was, they were very concerned about the one thing that could happen, and that's the man on the white horse, the person who is somehow able to pursue his own individual goals, to pursue his own power, to somehow appeal to enough people to get control of the country. Wow. That's what they were worried about. Yeah. And we've never had that happen here before. And we're having it happen now.
That's what this is.
That's what this is. That is absolutely what this is. And all you got to do is put together all the stories that you and all the other media report on to go back over 6 months and look at what each one is. Each one is an effort somehow or other by this president to assert his independent control, free of the limitations that are built into our system, so that he can do whatever he wants. That's what we are dealing with, and that's what people need to know about. And that's what I think I will say, especially, I think the people most susceptible to understanding this and recognizing it are a lot of your viewers. I think the viewers of Bloomberg are the kind of people who think seriously about stuff. And thinking seriously about this means not just thinking about it on the isolated level, think about it in the big picture.
We've got about a minute left. I'm struck by your tone and your words today, and I've been lucky to be talking to you for a few years. You're worried.
I'm very worried. I'm very worried, and I think I know lots of people who are very worried. And I think it's very easy to, well, it's natural. I'm not here to criticize people. I think it's very natural for people to want to get on with their lives. Sure. It's very natural to want to think about, so far I'm okay. Things are going along. It's very strange, but I'm okay. And I'm hoping things will keep being okay. And the stock market's still doing pretty well. And people want it to be okay. It's not okay is the issue. It's not okay because the President of the United States is dismantling our fundamental system.
Donald Ayer, many thanks for your insights and joining us today on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Bloomberg. The press briefing is underway at the White House right now. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt holding forth with reporters. We just got a bit of news. President Trump will be addressing the UN General Assembly on September 23rd. That's a Tuesday. Donald Trump back to UNGA, as we understand from the press secretary. We're going to be listening for questions about the firing of Lisa Cook, about the firing of the CDC director, which is actually something they're talking about right now as well. Peter Navarro's comment to us right here on Bloomberg TV and radio last evening that Russia's war in Ukraine is, quote unquote, Modi's war, making that point the day the 50% tariffs landed on India. It is a beautiful day in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Mostly sunny, 77. Perfect time for Vice President J.D. Vance to touch down, and he is in La Crosse today to tout the big, beautiful bill. But we're not calling it that, I think, any longer. He's actually at a steel fabricating facility to talk about the big bill's benefits for manufacturing. Go figure. Of course, J.D. Vance grew up in the Rust Belt. He's talking to the folks who brought him to the dance here. But as we heard from Donald Trump just 2 days ago in the cabinet meeting, the branding issue is what needs to be addressed on the Republican side of the aisle. Sure, you've got the road trip, and it's not just J.D. Vance. Any number of cabinet secretaries are fanning out across the country to deliver speeches, to try to close the deal, to try to sell what has already been passed. And a lot of lawmakers are trying to do that, too, during the August recess. But as Donald Trump said himself, the branding of the bill, the BBB, the big, beautiful bill we heard about 100 times a day through the whole debate, might be making the job a little more difficult. Here's what he said.
So the bill that I'm not going to use the term great, big, beautiful. That was good for getting it approved, but it's not good for explaining to people what it's all about. It's a massive tax cut for the middle class. It's a massive tax cut for jobs. And it's, I mean, think of it, no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security. So seniors, I don't know how you can vote for anybody else.
There you have it. So what do we call it? I guess we're selling a whole bunch of different components of what we used to call the big, beautiful bill. Let's assemble our political panel, both experts in messaging. Jeanne Zaino is with us, Bloomberg Politics contributor, democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center, Republican strategist Lisa Camooso Miller, former RNC communications director, host of the Friday Reporter podcast, and a veteran of a former Republican speaker's office. Lisa, let's get into this here, because this is a pretty interesting situation that we're talking about. A bill that's already passed that the administration is still trying to sell, bumping into a branding issue because nobody knows exactly what a big, beautiful bill is. You've experienced this before. After you pass a major legislative accomplishment, how do you sell it to the people who don't understand it?
I think you talk about it in plain English, just like the president said. I mean, certainly the president himself is a marketing person. No one would ever take that away from him. And he's right in trying to illustrate and demonstrate what he and the Republicans on Capitol Hill believe to be a bill that was designed specifically to help the economy, specifically the middle class, in a way that will make a bigger difference for them. And so that, I think, is what is happening. They're going to continue to call it the one big, beautiful bill because that's what the president called it when he arrived on Capitol Hill about 6 months ago and told the Congress that he wanted it to be done all at one time. And so now they're going to take that messaging and they're going to turn it into sound bites over and over and over again to make that message clear that they've done what they were asked to do.
Well, you know, Jeanne, he also said when he went to Capitol Hill behind closed doors, reportedly, he told Republican members, don't blank with Medicare. Don't blank with Medicaid. And of course, there are changes to these programs, specifically Medicaid, in this legislation that has upset a lot of voters of Democratic and Republican stripes. We just heard Abigail Spanberger's new ad attacking this bill the other day. What's the Democratic answer to this branding change?
Well, this has nothing to do with branding, and that's where the president is dead wrong. You have J.D. Vance out in Wisconsin today. We know that this will cost Wisconsin voters, this bill, almost $300 million. It will strip 276,000 Wisconsinites from health coverage from those Wisconsinites. It will remove food via SNAP from tens of thousands of Wisconsinites and children, most specifically. So the president can try to dress this up any way he wants. He can try to send J.D. Vance and these other surrogates out to sell it. But there is a reason that members of Congress on the Republican side have been avoiding going out into forums with their own constituents and talking about it, because it doesn't matter whether they're Republican or Democrat. Voters know that this bill is a bill that is going to cost them dearly in terms of things that matter to them, their health, and the food supply and their ability to pay for both. So Democrats are going to be talking about the reality of this bill. And I guess the president's going to continue to try to pretend that a bill that is favoring the wealthy and taking from the needy is something other than it is. But you can't continue to make that case when people see their health care and their food being stripped from them. They will know that regardless of what any of these folks say.
How important or how effective are these road trips anyway, Lisa? I remember President Obama lamenting the fact that they didn't make a more concerted effort to travel the country and tell them what was in the Affordable Care Act, that it remained confusing and elusive to a lot of people. Does putting J.D. Vance on a plane to La Crosse actually help?
Well, the reason why it works, Joe, is because local media will cover when the vice president comes to town and when he talks about the issues and what his speech addressed. And that's, I think, where the real value is that people will start to hear about those issues as they relate to the local community in their own local news coverage. And so as much as Jeannie's not wrong about what she said about the specific particulars, it's going to be a game of messaging, a game of telling what it is they believe to be the highlights of this particular piece of legislation. And then it's incumbent on the Democratic side of the aisle to talk about the types of points that Jeannie made in order to make it more clear to the voters about what it is that's included in this bill. So having the vice president with a very strong voice in the community definitely helps with the news coverage and helping the Republicans sell their point of view on the legislation.
Pew Research poll, Jeannie, the pollster in you, I'm sure, is eager to dig into this. With approval ratings on the tax legislation, you can call it whatever you want here, but the numbers are the numbers. 32% approve, according to Pew Research, 46% disapprove, and 23% are not sure. Guess they'll be listening to J.D. Vance today. But when you see numbers like this, and you consider some of the town hall meetings that the likes of Mike Flood and Brian Stile had to endure, what kind of work do Republicans have ahead?
They have an uphill battle. And you were right to reference prior Barack Obama. He had, and the Democrats had, an uphill battle. We've seen this repeatedly throughout modern American history. When you pass these big bills and then you go to try to sell them in advance of a midterm, it is very difficult to do. And we've been talking here about the impact on healthcare and food assistance, but let's just look at other things. $3.3+ trillion added to an already enormous debt, which is very concerning to voters. And on top of that, a voter base, even on the Republican side, that is frustrated by what they describe as endless wars. And you have, for the first time, a military budget of over $1 trillion. And in order to pay for that, you've taken away people's health care and their food. So those facts will matter. And J.D. Vance will go out and try to talk about this as a tax cut for working families, but that is going to be a very difficult sell for Republicans. But we have to see if Democrats can be united and stay on message and make this case. This is why the president is not talking about this much. He's talking about a lot of other things like crime and safety and immigration that he thinks are much more within his bailiwick and will gain him support. He doesn't want to talk about the impact on people's pocketbooks because what he's done is so widely unpopular, according to the polls.
Boy, we're certainly being reminded of the bad blood that lawmakers left town with after passing said big, beautiful bill, but also the rescissions package that followed. And boy, that seemed to be the backbreaker here, Lisa, with Democrats telling us on the air they didn't see how we could avoid a government shutdown at this point because there's so little trust between D's and R's to make a deal on funding the government. We've got a little bit less than a minute. Are we going to shut down at the end of September?
Yeah, it looks, Joe, like that's really that's where we're headed. You have to believe that the president's not going to want that to happen. And so there's going to be, I think that the Congress continues to surprise us in the way that they're getting their work done. So that is a threat. I think government is very much at threat. But I think ultimately what we'll see is that they'll pull it out and that the government will not shut down because that's not the kind of message that they want to be spreading across the country.
Fascinating. Lisa Camooso Miller, Jeanne Zaino, many thanks to both of you for the insights. A great panel today as we drive our way through the Thursday session here on Balance of Power. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. Coming up, we're going to turn to Nvidia earnings, the aftermath today, a conversation with Caroline Hyde, and much more on the AI race with China when we talk to Ashton. It's all ahead on Bloomberg. The day after Nvidia earnings, with a lot of questions about what really we should take away from this earnings report and the call that followed, not to mention some of the headlines that have emerged since then with Nvidia talking about selling a version of Blackwell to China. It was a chance to watch two masters at work last evening after 4 o'clock when the report dropped. Romaine Bostick was with us, so was Caroline Hyde, as they dropped the breaking news and the stock movement before our eyes. And I'm delighted to say that Caroline Hyde is back this day after, now that we've had a chance to sleep on this and consider what matters. The host of Bloomberg Tech, the co-host Caroline, great to see you. It's always a treat to have you with us here on Balance of Power, because I want to know what's real here. I'm seeing a lot of headlines throughout the space. Nvidia disappointed. Nvidia fell short. Concerns about the forecast. Warning on AI spend. What's actually true here? Because Jensen Huang showed up with a pretty good story to tell last night.
He did. And I think this is a story of a company that's already worth more than $4 trillion and 1% off of its record high. And it had to smash expectations. And that was very hard to do when the narrative is complex, and so are the numbers of analysts as to whether they baked in Chinese revenue or not. And so, yes, if you were looking at the consensus of what analysts on the street thought forward-looking guidance would be like, well, half of them had included China and half of them hadn't. And so when Nvidia itself stripped out those numbers, $54 billion was slightly shy of the average consensus, but it wasn't including China. And that's a massive upside if you think that he can convince the current administration to allow him to sell what we're colloquially calling B30s, these reorientated Blackwell architecture chips into China. He's saying there's a $50 billion opportunity in 1 year alone in China, a growth of 50% in terms of how much the demand for semiconductors is growing there at the moment. He is desperately trying to convince the administration that it is worth taking on that IP risk, that national security risk, with caveats and with ensuring that he does it safely to the right end use case. And maybe they do take a 15% revenue share as they do with H20s. I thought what was really interesting and real true facts came through to our Ed Ludlow and our Ian King, who did that incredible interview with Colette Kress, who is the CFO. They asked her, look, give us the nuance on how you're able to access the H20 demand. She said, look, it's $2 to $5 billion in this current fiscal quarter. But at the moment, I haven't got the exact codified regulation that perhaps I need to be able to give that 15% to the US government. Perhaps I don't need that. I've already got the licenses. Let me go sell. So there's still some geopolitical lines that need to be ironed, I think, for Nvidia to be able to get ahead of this. But they're setting out the demand, the sheer demand that there is in China, the sheer demand that there is from capital expenditure of $600 billion coming from the hyperscalers here in the United States, the sheer AI sovereign demand that was $20 billion in the previous quarter. For most people, I think this was a good set of numbers. It's just digestion because people around the edges, like the hedge funds and day traders, they want smashing of records rather than long-term growth.
Of course. Well, just perfect context, Caroline. I'm still a little confused about this 15% deal. And it wasn't just Nvidia, it was AMD. You guys found the filing in the earnings report last evening that made it clear that this deal the White House was touting has not been fully baked. Yeah. You're pointing out that we're looking ahead to B30. Is that what we call these lower end Blackwells now? But what about the H20? Do they have the licenses or not?
Well, that's what Colette Kress was saying and telling Ed and Ian, was that they do a few. But that ramp up of license giving isn't happening perhaps at the pace that they would like to see to access that $5 billion of Chinese demand in this current fiscal quarter, the third quarter. That's why they haven't baked it into the numbers. And actually, you're so right in referencing AMD, because Lisa Su, too, hadn't given any forecast for China, and her stock got beaten up on the day. Even though she beat, she was also trying to say, look, I'm not confident enough yet to be able to put them into my numbers. But look, we've had analysts and investors on our show earlier today. I'm just thinking of Sands Capital that came on earlier. And he was trying to say, look, get rid of China. Even if you strip out China entirely, this is a company that is delivering and is unstoppable in terms of the sheer pace of compute that it can deliver, the cadence at which they're able to bring you yet more and more sophisticated underlying technology that allows you to do more with less when it comes to less energy needed for more sophisticated compute. Most long-term holders of this stock thinks it's a good thing. But you're right. For me, the big cloud is geopolitics. It's your world, Joe, that is the big cloud, the intersection of politics and technology, and trying to understand how much they're going to be allowed to access China in the future. Get this, I think what's really interesting for your audience is on the day, go and check out what Cambricon is doing. This is a Chinese AI accelerator maker. Its market valuation has doubled in the last month. Why? Wow. Because of this limitation on AMD and Nvidia, because this idea that China is leaning ever more heavily on helping its own domestic chip makers grow rather than accessing the future of Nvidia.
Perfect analysis, as ever, from Caroline Hyde, the co-host of Bloomberg Tech. And I'd love to keep talking with you about this, Caroline, because it does appear our worlds are colliding. Many thanks, as always, for the insights and much more to learn about this earnings report, the stock movement going forward. What will be the deal that the White House cuts with Nvidia and AMD, for that matter, when it comes to China? Because it does look like, as Caroline said, it's going to need to come from here. That's why we want to talk to Anna Ashton, our China expert, former Ashton Analytics founder, I should say, a specialist in U.S.-China trade, and had spent time as a former China analyst, Department of Defense. Anna, it's great to have you. Sorry, as I make my way through your business card here, I'm deeply curious to know what you're thinking about this, because there were questions about whether we were mortgaging our national security to help Nvidia sell some of these chips, whether it's H20 or B30, if we up the ante here in China. Now that we understand from these companies that the deal is in fact not completely in place, what are we talking about? And how does that jive with what the White House said?
What are we talking about, indeed? You know, I think that the Trump administration is very practiced at dangling potential deals and then withholding follow through until they are satisfied with the counteroffer from the other party. And that right now, a lot of what's in play is the uncertainty around some sort of trade deal. There are things that the Trump administration wants from China in exchange for, loosening the gates and allowing these chips to flow into China more aggressively than they can with the licenses that Nvidia has in hand. And we'll just have to see if there is progress made or how soon there is progress made on some of those asks.
Yeah. Well, you also wonder what the appetite will be in China, because when the White House first announced this arrangement that appears to not be fully codified, China was reportedly telling buyers in the tech space there to stay away from Nvidia, to avoid these chips, to buy Huawei and not take the American route, to the point where Nvidia actually told some of its manufacturers, the H20, to slow their roll while they figured out exactly what the demand case would be. Should we assume that China has a thirst for more American technology?
Not in the long run, Joe. In the short run, they may not have a choice about procuring technology if it's made available. But certainly the Chinese government is working very hard to develop and buttress its own domestic industry, because it doesn't want to have to rely on deals like this or potential promises in order to be able to access the chips that it needs to develop AI capabilities. I think that there is a lot of potential for sales, but ultimately that is a narrow window. And it's part of the reason why Nvidia is so eager to get sales going as soon as possible.
Yeah. Spent some time last evening, Anna, with Peter Navarro. We were talking about a couple of different things, including India and the new tariffs that have been put up on India, now 50%, including that additional 25% as punishment for buying Russian oil. I bring this up because you're a China expert, and the criticism in Washington and in many cases around the world has been that the United States is actually pushing India further into China's arms and in maybe eliminating the alternative that we could seek with another major world trading partner as the White House considers warming relations with China. I asked Peter Navarro about this, and he ended up making news this morning in India as he referred to Russia's war in Ukraine as Modi's war. I asked him about the China effect as well. Listen to what he said, Anna.
Everybody in America loses because of what India is doing. The consumers and businesses and everything lose, and workers lose because India's high tariffs cost us jobs and factories and income and higher wages. And then the taxpayers lose because we got to fund Modi's war.
What's your thought on this, and what does it mean for India's relationship with China?
Well, I think it is indisputable that the Trump administration's retaliatory tariffs on India are, encouraging the Indian government to consider some sort of détente, more significant détente with Beijing. Mm-hmm. The foreign minister was in India last week, early in the week, for talks that were billed as being about the border dispute that's been ongoing for a long time. But clearly, the talks were covering other things based on statements from the ambassador to India, who basically asserted that the U.S. was bullying India by putting these tariffs on Russian oil. India and China have a lot of differences that won't be easy to smooth out, but they have some significant common ground when it comes to their desire and need to continue buying Russian oil. And China definitely sees India as a country they want to stay in that game so that it protects the flow of Russian oil. It ensures that Russian oil continues to flow out of Russia.
There's Bloomberg reporting that Beijing, in fact, began a quiet outreach to India back in March when the president started beating the drum on tariffs. President Xi Jinping wrote a letter to India to test the waters on improving ties. We've got a little more than a minute. Anna Ashton, what will that letter lead to?
Well, I think that the effort at détente from the Beijing side actually started even earlier, though definitely a letter from Xi Jinping to Modi is an inflection point that can't be ignored.
Yeah.
At the end of the month, Modi is traveling to China for the first time since 2018 in order to participate in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization's meeting of heads of state. I think that speaks volumes about the prospects for a warming trend in response to the U.S. moves.
Wow. A warming trend, says Anna Ashton. Ashton Analytics, former China analyst with the Department of Defense. Anna, thank you, as always, for the insights and helping us better understand what's going on. We're going to continue this conversation, by the way, on the late edition of Balance of Power with another voice of experience. Ambassador Nick Burns is going to be with us, the former U.S. ambassador to China, to try to get a better sense of what these talks could lead to, what the tariffs against India could bring about with regard to U.S.-China relations. So we'll meet you back here 5 p.m. Eastern time. Big thanks to our panel and all of our guests today, including Donald Ayer, for quite a conversation this hour. We have a lot more to cover here. We'll keep tabs on the rest of the White House press briefing. Caroline Leavitt is talking to reporters as we speak, and we'll have much more straight ahead here. Bloomberg Business Week Daily is on the way, only on Bloomberg.